In 2025, Spirit Airlines, the queen of $50 fares that charges you for everything, even for the air you breathe, is filing for bankruptcy for the second time in a year. How did this bold underdog conquer the skies with ultra-cheap flights, only to plummet toward extinction? Discover the epic saga of rise and ruin. Don't miss it. The humble beginnings. To understand Spirit's downfall, we must go back to its humble origins. It all started with a small charter service in Detroit. In 1983, a young entrepreneur named Ned Homfeld founded Charter One, operating cheap vacation flights from the Midwest to destinations like Las Vegas and Atlantic City. For nearly a decade, Charter One transported gamblers and sunseekers on leased, no-frills planes. The concept was simple: low costs, low fares, filling every seat. In 1992, after nearly 10 years of modest success, the company took a bold step. It bought its own planes and renamed itself Spirit Airlines. On June 1, 1992, Spirit's first scheduled flight took off from Detroit to Atlantic City. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the start of something big. In the 1990s, Spirit Airlines expanded methodically. It added routes from Detroit and new hubs in Atlantic City and Fort Lauderdale, tapping into Americans' love of low-cost travel. By the end of the decade, Spirit had a fleet of McDonnell Douglas DC-9s and MD-80s that carried budget travelers to Florida beaches and beyond. Detroit's small airline was growing rapidly. It even moved its headquarters to Florida in 1999, establishing itself in the heart of the U.S. tourist corridor. Even in those early years, however, signs of turbulence emerged. Spirit learned the hard way that tight margins come with risk. In one infamous 1994 incident, the airline overbooked flights and abruptly canceled 1,500 tickets, stranding swarms of angry passengers. Chaos erupted at airport terminals. It was a preview of the operational problems that would become part of Spirit's reputation. The message was clear: Spirit would do whatever it took to cut costs, even if it meant courting controversies. In the late 90s, Spirit joined low-cost airlines by standardizing operations. It eliminated old aircraft and committed to a single type of aircraft to save on maintenance and training. By 2001, it operated more than 50 MD-80 jets, one of the largest such fleets in North America. He was no longer a niche player. It became a significant presence in the domestic market, known for undermining competitors' prices. Passengers flocked to Spirit for a $99 round trip to Florida, even if it meant cramped seats and no free snacks. Initial turbulence and ULCC transformation. But at the start of the new millennium, Spirit Airlines faced serious headwinds. By 2004, the company was losing money in spades, up to $70 million a year. The initial low-fare formula was not enough. Rising costs and brutal competition from major airlines threatened to land Spirit forever. The situation was serious. In January 2005, Spirit's leadership made a pivotal decision that would define its identity for the next 2 decades. They hired a new CEO, Ben Baldanza, a hard-minded executive with a radical plan. Baldanza's vision was to transform Spirit from a typical low-cost airline into an ultra-low-cost carrier, ULCC, where the base fare buys little more than a seat and everything else costs extra. At the time, this model was almost unknown in the U.S., but Baldanza and his team were inspired by Ryanair's success in Europe and wanted to import that philosophy without frills. It was a bold gamble, an all-or-nothing attempt to save the airline by completely changing the way it operates. Immediately, Spirit cut amenities and added charges. Checked bags, extra, a soda or pretzels, take out your wallet, choose a seat in advance, pay. By 2007, Spirit planned to charge for something every American traveler took for granted: carry-on luggage. Experts and passengers were shocked. Charging for space in the overhead bins was considered madness. No U.S. airline had ever tried. But Spirit didn't flinch. In 2010, it officially became the first U.S. airline to make passengers pay for space in the upper bins. The outrage was immediate. Late-night comedians scoffed, travelers protested, but Spirit had touched a nerve. The ultra-low-cost model began to work. By stripping air travel to the essentials, Spirit drastically reduced its costs. It offered ridiculously low base fares, sometimes $9, and recouped profits with fees for just about everything else. This became Spirit's infamous bare fare. You pay only for the seat, and anything else is optional. Carry-on baggage, $30. Checked bag, $40. A bottle of water, $3. Print the boarding pass at the airport? It is also difficult. The message was cheeky and unapologizing. We'll get you cheap, but don't expect luxuries. Spirit even painted its planes with a fluorescent yellow scheme in 2014, like flying billboards screaming, cheap. It wasn't luxury, but millions of passengers who couldn't afford bigger airlines now had a way to fly. Spirit's gamble paid off for a while. After reinventing itself as the ultimate budget airline, Spirit returned to profitability. By 2006, it was replacing its old fleet with new Airbus A320 for efficiency. In 2011, Spirit went public on NASDAQ under the ticker SAVE, a nod to the savings travelers get by flying with Spirit. Investors loved the growth story. Wall Street saw Spirit as the emblem of a new era in air travel, where flying could be as cheap as taking a bus. In 2014, Morgan Stanley crowned Spirit the best airline growth stock, impressed by its growing revenues and expanding route map. Spirit was flying high, literally. Success at the cost of reputation. However, Spirit's success came with a high price for its reputation. The airline became a joke in the industry, the carrier that people loved to hate. Jokes circulated such as, Spirit is so cheap they could charge for oxygen. Customers routinely complained about cramped seats. Spirit crammed more seats on its planes than almost any rival. Delays and endless charges. In 2012, Spirit made national headlines for cruelly denying a refund to a dying veteran, a PR disaster that forced CEO Ben Baldanza to reluctantly apologize and change policy. Spirit's customer satisfaction scores were perennially the worst in America. Year after year, it ranked last in surveys and received more complaints than any other airline. But Baldanza would coldly reply, "You get what you pay for." As long as the planes were full and profits were healthy, Spirit seemed content to be the villain of the industry if it meant being the shareholder darling. Interestingly, beneath the surface, Spirit tried to improve in certain areas. After difficult years, he worked on his operations. For 2016 and 2017, Spirit's punctual performance came off the bottom to be among the best in the country. They hired Bob Fornaro, former CEO of AirTran, to succeed Baldanza and soften the airline's image. They even consulted with the Disney Institute to improve customer service, hoping to shed the reputation of airline from hell. For a brief moment, it seemed that Spirit could go from just cheap to cheap and reasonably reliable. In fact, in 2018, an air safety group bizarrely named Spirit as the only North American airline on its list of the 10 safest, a bit of positive press that Spirit desperately needed. Even so, tension and turmoil were never far from Spirit Airlines. Operating an airline on an ultra-tight budget is like walking a tightrope. One mistake and you're in trouble. Over the years, Spirit faced labor unrest and operational breakdowns that kept its problems in the headlines. In 2010, Spirit pilots went on strike, landing the airline for 5 days and stranding thousands of passengers until Spirit agreed to improve wages. In May 2017, a dispute with the pilots' union led to a collapse that led to the cancellation of 9 flights in one night in Fort Lauderdale. Frustrated passengers erupted in a near mutiny at the gate. Videos showed screaming crowds, police intervening, and 3 arrests in the chaos. The message was clear. If something went wrong, Spirit didn't have the shock absorbers or goodwill of a major airline. Things could get out of hand quickly. The fusion drama. What followed were months of bitter corporate drama. Spirit's CEO argued strongly that JetBlue's offer, while higher, was a poisoned chalice. Regulators might never approve it, and JetBlue's plan involved eliminating Spirit's low-cost model and raising fares. He insisted that the deal with Frontier was safer and better for long-term competition. JetBlue persisted, launching a hostile offer directly to Spirit shareholders and urging them to vote against the merger with Frontier. By the summer of 2022, the once cordial Spirit-Frontier deal turned into open war between JetBlue and Frontier, with Spirit's board in the crossfire. At one point, Spirit had to postpone its shareholder vote multiple times, while both bidders upped the ante and lobbied investors. For Spirit employees and customers, it was a confusing whirlwind. The future of their airline hung in the balance, decided in board meetings and Wall Street. In July 2022, the drama culminated. Spirit's shareholders rejected the merger with Frontier, effectively greenlighting a deal with JetBlue. It was an impressive turnaround. David Neeleman, founder of JetBlue, allegedly joked that Spirit was the cutest girl at the ball, and JetBlue was determined to take her home. JetBlue won the acquisition battle. Spirit's management, which had battled JetBlue, had to swallow pride and embrace the new suitor. The plan was ready. JetBlue would absorb Spirit, turning those yellow planes into JetBlue colors, and the Spirit name would eventually disappear. In a joint announcement, JetBlue's CEO proclaimed that acquiring Spirit would help create a stronger low-fare challenger against the big airlines, though many were skeptical, as JetBlue planned to eliminate Spirit's ultra-cheap seats for its more expensive service. Still, for Spirit investors, JetBlue's fat check was hard to resist. The deal was worth $3.8 billion, a stroke of luck that implied a bright side to Spirit's volatile journey. They only needed the blessing of federal regulators. And that's where it all fell apart. The U.S. Department of Justice had other ideas. In March 2023, the DOJ sued to block the JetBlue-Spirit merger, warning that removing Spirit, the largest ULCC in the country, would be terrible for consumers. They argued that Spirit's very existence forced major airlines to maintain low fares. If JetBlue took over and domesticated Spirit's cheap flights, everyone's prices would go up. JetBlue fought back, insisting that the merger would help compete against the giants. The stage was set for a legal showdown. For most of 2023, Spirit found itself in a strange limbo. Technically still independent, but it had paused many plans waiting to be bought. The uncertainty drained morale and damaged bookings. Some customers were confused if Spirit still existed, or if the flights would be on JetBlue. Meanwhile, competition in the post-pandemic travel boom was fierce. Major airlines added capacity and economy basic fares, dulling Spirit's price advantage. Lesser rivals such as Frontier and Allegiant were encroaching on Spirit territory with cheap rates of their own. Spirit's financial health, already weakened by the pandemic and the 2021 meltdown, deteriorated further. At the end of 2022, Spirit reported steep losses: $36 million in one quarter, $270 million in the next. Every month that the merger remained uncertain, Spirit lost cash and market share. The merger block and the financial crash. Then came January 2024. A federal judge in Massachusetts has ruled decisively against the JetBlue-Spirit merger. Citing antitrust laws more than a century old, the court concluded that allowing JetBlue to buy Spirit would substantially reduce competition in the airline industry. It was a victory for the DOJ and, ostensibly, for price-conscious consumers. In a poetic flourish, the judge acknowledged Spirit's loyal customers, essentially writing, "Spirit is a small airline, but for those who love it, this is for you." Spirit's unique place as a budget carrier was legally recognized. But ironically, that legal victory set the stage for Spirit's greatest tragedy. With the merger blocked, JetBlue was forced to terminate the deal in early 2024. JetBlue would pay Spirit a $70 million breakup fee, money Spirit desperately needed, but $70 million was a drop in the bucket compared to the billions in debt and losses Spirit carried. The merger collapse left Spirit alone, bruised and financially fragile in an unforgiving industry. CEO Ted Christie had bet everything on merging, first with Frontier, then JetBlue, and now those options were gone. Spirit's stock price plunged as investors feared the airline would not survive on its own. By mid-2024, Spirit Airlines was operating on fumes. Costs were rising. Fuel prices jumped and labor was not cheap. Spirit had given raises to retain pilots and crew. Meanwhile, the ultra-low-cost niche was under assault. Passengers had more options for cheap flights, and some, burned out by bad experiences, vowed not to return to Spirit even if it meant paying a little more elsewhere. The company's internal forecasts turned bleak. Without the merger, Spirit needed a miracle to stay afloat. That miracle never came. November 2024. Spirit Airlines entered Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, seeking to restructure debts and fight for a second chance. It was an amazing moment. Spirit had not gone bankrupt in its more than 30-year history. Now he was in court, asking for time to reorganize. The first bankruptcy was relatively quick. By March 2025, Spirit emerged from Chapter 11 after renegotiating aircraft leases and securing new financing. CEO Ted Christie sounded optimistic when he announced, "We have simplified our operation and strengthened our financial position. We're transforming Spirit for long-term success." At Spirit's shiny new headquarters in Dania Beach, Florida, a campus grandly opened in 2024 even as the merger fell through, management spoke of a fresh start and continued commitment to redefine low-fare travel with new products and better service. But reality hit hard in 2025. The post-bankruptcy rebound that Spirit's leaders had hoped for never materialized. By the summer of 2025, it was clear that the airline's problems ran deeper than a quick reorganization could fix. High interest rates and a cooling economy meant fewer people splurging on leisure travel. Customers who flew were lured by major airlines offering sales, or by arch-rival ultra-low-cost Frontier, which gleefully grabbed market share while Spirit pulled back. Spirit, constrained by its financial problems, cut flights, which only gave more business to competitors. Every factor seemed to conspire against the yellow planes, double bankruptcy, and the uncertain future. In August 2025, Spirit's own financial reports contained a dire warning. There is substantial doubt about the company's ability to continue as a going concern. In plain language, Spirit admitted that he might not survive another 12 months. The airline ran out of cash fast. To prevent collapse, Spirit took extreme measures. He sold 29 of his aging Airbus for cash and canceled orders for dozens of new planes he could no longer afford. Mass layoffs began. 270 pilots in one hit, and 1,800 flight attendants received notifications as the airline cut flight schedules. Gates and landing slots at airports were put up for sale. Spirit literally shrunk to survive, like a ship throwing everything overboard so as not to sink. By October 2025, Spirit did what it had tried to avoid. It entered bankruptcy again, a second Chapter 11 filing in less than a year. This time, there were no sweeteners. Spirit announced a drastic turnaround plan. It would cut its fleet in half, returning more than 100 aircraft to lessors, and focus only on more profitable routes. Entire cities disappeared from Spirit's route map as it retreated to strong markets. They even hinted at a strategic shift, considering adding more comfortable seats and attracting higher-paying customers, a sign that the old formula was no longer working. It was a massive recall for a carrier that once boasted of flying to more than 90 destinations at its peak. Inside Spirit, executives faced a sober truth. The company probably wouldn't make it alone. In the October 2025 bankruptcy filings, Spirit conceded that the best outcome might be to merge or sell to another airline, effectively surrendering its independence to salvage some piece of the business. It was ironically bitter. After the government blocked the sale to JetBlue to preserve competition, Spirit was now begging for someone, anyone, to buy it before it died completely. Suddenly, Frontier Airlines reappeared in the rumors. Gossip circulated that Frontier might try to merge with Spirit now that it was on edge, a rescue merger that regulators would have to think twice about blocking, since Spirit's alternative was liquidation. Other names have emerged as interested parties, from private equity firms to possibly the big carriers eyeing slots and low-priced Spirit jets. Spirit's leadership kept quiet about who the interested counterparts were, but made it clear they were actively looking for a lifeline. As 2025 winds down, Spirit Airlines' future hangs in the balance. The once thriving budget hauler has shrunk itself into a shell of itself, awaiting salvation or final judgment. What will 2026 bring? There are possible endings to the Spirit saga, and most involve Spirit as we know it disappearing. The most hopeful scenario, Frontier, or another airline, closes a deal to buy out remaining assets from failing Spirit, keeping Spirit planes flying in some form. Regulators, faced with the choice of merger or total failure of Spirit, could relent and allow the marriage to save jobs and preserve some competition against giants. In that case, Spirit Airlines would cease to exist as a standalone brand, integrated into a larger airline, but at least its planes and people would continue. It would be a bittersweet ending. The name Spirit might vanish, but the legacy of its low fees would live on in a new entity. The other scenario is much bleaker. If no buyer shows up and the turnaround fails, the company could be forced to liquidate. One day, in 2026, Spirit's last flight would take off and land, and that would be it. The airline that democratized flying for so many would be landed forever. Its planes would be repossessed by lessors or auctioned off to competitors. Its airport gates, valuable assets in places like Orlando, Las Vegas, and Fort Lauderdale, would be monopolized by those same competitors. Ironically, JetBlue or the Big Four could get parts from Spirit in the end, but not in a way that helps keep fares low. If Spirit disappears, millions of travelers lose an ultra-cheap option, and the competition the DOJ fought to protect suffers anyway. Fewer airlines mean higher prices, exactly what Spirit's existence prevented. It's a cruel twist. By trying to save consumers from a merger, regulators could have sealed the fate of the airline that maintained honest fares. For now, Spirit Airlines is in survival mode, its fate uncertain. The next few months will determine whether this troubled carrier finds a savior or faces a final sunset flight. It's a tragic end either way for a company that, love it or hate it, undeniably changed the airline industry. Spirit showed the world that flying could be insanely cheap, and showed major airlines that there is a huge market at the low end of the price spectrum. Legacy carriers responded with their own basic economy fares, and new ultra-low-cost players emerged following Spirit's playbook. In that sense, Spirit's influence will live on long after its last plane lands.